Hello, dear viewer, it's me, Lightning McQueen from the original Cars movie. They actually replaced me in the second and third films, but no one ever noticed. To answer your questions, I am the car itself. I am not inside the car. I posted a poll on YouTube.com asking for bad songs from good albums. Pink Cell Phone off of Deftones' Saturday Night Wrist was my example. A song on an already fantastic record that you just wished kinda didn't exist. Be sure to become a channel member for a guaranteed slot in these community videos. Anyway, I got a bunch of good answers this time. Some good, some borderline illogical. So let's hop in, shall we? Solomon McGuire says, "See You in My Nightmares" off of 808s and Heartbreak by Kanye West. It's my favorite album of all time, but when it gets to Lil Wayne's part, I just can't vibe with it. I understand the take here, and while I suppose it is the worst track on the record, I don't think it's the sole reason I find the album weak. The entire last third of this project, I think, is a massive step down on this record, and while this probably is the stinkiest stinker, it's not the sole contributor of the mid, I don't think. Feels like a decent answer to me. Chili Dog is here, says Seamus off of Metal by Pink Floyd. Yeah, this song sucks. I have no idea what they were thinking, really. A giant step in the wrong direction for this band. It sounds more like Uma Guma than anything that kind of follows this album. Just comfortably the worst track here. And definitely part of why this album isn't up there with the big four. Just kind of extremely out of place on this project as well. It's a waste of space on a fairly tight record otherwise. I think this is a great answer. RJ Scooper says Drunken Hot Girls off of Graduation by Kanye West. The song sounds drunk but isn't hot to say the least. This breaks my heart. It's a track featuring Mos Def, one of my personal goats, but I must admit this track sucks balls. A massive step down from the rest of this album, for certain. Lyrically super empty on an album with a fairly interesting narrative otherwise. Sonically, this kind of stinks as well. Really weak production. This just sucks, to be honest. Great answer. Maple Brown says Revolution 9 off of the White Album by the Beatles. Obviously an experiment, but at a very odd place on the White Album. I feel like something else is meant to be in its place. This is just terrible stuff. I don't have the Beatles' rose-tinted glasses, to be honest. I like them, and of course I have infinite respect for them, but I'm not afraid to call a spade here. This is a terrible song. If this weren't from the Beatles, this might be a worst song of all time contender. It's just a bunch of noise, with very few musical qualities, and in 8 minutes and 22 seconds, it's the longest song on this record. Horrible doo-doo-ass garbage, I think. Great answer. Bellac0662 says Maxwell's Silver Hammer off of Abbey Road by the Beatles. I can't agree here. I wouldn't describe this as a highlight of the record by any means, but I do think it has its place on this project. The last track made me want to turn the record off. This, I wouldn't even skip. It's good fun, I'd say. It's not reinventing the wheel, but it's a decent track on the record. Nothing worth trashing, I don't think. I'm going to give this a bad answer. Acid Bath Lover 26 says Wild Honey Pie off of the White Album by the Beatles. White Album's a good contender for the best album of all time, but then you just got some straight hootin' and hollerin' from this track. The only thing that inclines me to place this track above a song like Revolution 9 is the length. It's only 53 seconds, and as a Tool fan, I've sat through significantly worse for significantly longer. Does this suck balls? It does, but I don't even think it's the worst song on the record, which is pretty baffling to think about, and I don't really want to talk about it anymore. I'm going to go with good answer. Jonathan Lufkin says Mantra off of Lateralis by Tool. Again, this sucks, but I'm not sure this is the worst track on the album, to be honest. Sonically, it's perhaps the least enjoyable, but stay with me for a second. It's an interlude played prior to Schism, and I don't think it does a terrible job at doing that. It's not trying to be an incredible track, it's merely a segue between two already fantastic ones. The closing track, if it can be called a track, is a waste of space on this record. An alien-sighting ramble that just really doesn't serve much of a purpose. They both kind of stink, but I prefer Mantra's place in the album to that of Fap de Oyad. I'm going to give this a good answer. Whalmer says Dawn Patrol off of Rust in Peace by Megadeth. Good thing is that it at least is short and doesn't slow down the pacing of the album too much. This one sucks for sure, but I think I disagree with what you said. I think this track absolutely does disrupt the flow of this album in a pretty major way. It follows what I think is the best song on the record, and with all that momentum, you're met with a pretty mediocre track. I don't think it's as bad as some of the tracks I've already mentioned, but it certainly makes Rust in Peace worse by its existence, to be honest. I'm going to go good answer. Brad Likes Alice in Chains says Wet My Bed off of Core by Stone Temple Pilots. Another track that follows what I think is comfortably the best track on the record. An album like this has no real excuse to have a song like this either. It just feels unnecessary. With a band like Tool, it almost makes sense to have some off-putting interludes. But on a fairly standard hard rock record like this, it doesn't make sense to me. Really strange inclusion, and certainly a track I find myself skipping almost every time I listen to this. I'm going to go great answer. Airalex9423 says The Fuck Jam off of Quebec by Ween. Basically a shitpost in 2003, but it's a shitpost among some of the greatest music ever made. I was flabbergasted listening to it between two great songs. Yeah, it's pretty wild. This track follows one of my favorites of all time, and it is easily the worst track here. Very Ween, but more so early Ween on this track, and at this point in their career, this track just falls flat on its face. Feels like almost blatant filler, sonically and even narratively. I don't really understand how it fits on this record. I don't understand why it made the cut over several incredible demos. I don't understand. This is a great answer. Shoegazer Productions 7706 says Orinoco Flow off of Watermark by Enya. As an Enya fan, I can't tell you how many times I have to tell them not all Enya sounds like this. I've grown to resent it, and it's also boring as shit to sing. Not really familiar with the artist here, nor the record, but this song doesn't seem too terrible to me. I thought it was alright. I can't really arrive at a conclusion here, but this sounds like a Radiohead Creep situation to me. A song that kind of eclipsed the rest of the artist's discography in terms of popularity, and you've kind of grown to resent it for doing so. But just like Creep, I don't think the song is bad in a vacuum. I'm going to give this a bad answer, I'm afraid. Lucas Logdenberg says Revolving Doors off of Amnesiac by Radiohead. I can't stand that noise. I don't think I'd go quite so far. I don't really enjoy the song, but I don't think I'd say I can't stand it. Feels like a decent enough interlude that kind of just lasts for too long. I agree this album would definitely be better without it, but this isn't the worst shit we've come across today. I'll give this a good answer. Dubub14 says Love Song off of Sap by Alice in Chains. Now this is a terrible song, especially on a fairly tight EP like Sap, only 5 tracks, and I think all the others are at least a 7 out of 10. The song heavily weighs this project down. I have no idea what they were going for here. It's sonically just completely different from the rest of the record and genuinely sucks the life out of this project. Really strange inclusion. Regardless of its hidden track status, this track just sucks balls. This is a great answer. Kona Peep says On the Run off of Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd. Is this the worst song on Dark Side of the Moon? Actually, no. I'd give that to the minute-long heartbeat that opens up the record. I find Dark Side of the Moon to be an album that is much better consumed as a whole than it is consumed via individual tracks. Take out any pieces of this puzzle and I think it kind of just gets a little worse. I don't think this is a highlight of the record by any means, and I agree it's probably one of the lowest points, but I don't think this album would improve much without it. I think it's a crucial piece of the album, unlike Speak to Me, which I think would change very little. I'm going to give this a bad answer, I'm afraid, but it's certainly not one of the best tracks on the record. Homogeneity says Bones off of The Bends by Radiohead. How could we plausibly say Bones is the worst track on The Bends? Again, it's not a highlight of the record, but I would never go out of my way to skip this track on a full album re-listen. That Crown Goes to Sulk, a far worse song on the same record. Bones is no masterpiece, but I think it's got its place on the project. Sulk, I think, is just straight up worse in every way. Fuck Sulk. Another bad answer, I'm afraid. Moz says Bugs off of Vitalogy by Pearl Jam. Bugs is certainly the funniest answer on this album, but again, I'm afraid there's actually a far worse song. Does Bugs suck complete balls? It does, but is it worse than Stupid Mop? It is not. Bugs feels like a gag track. It's lyrically empty. It's sonically off. It feels like it almost intended to be bad. Bugs is a song with a bit of charm, I would say. Stupid Mop fucking sucks ass for triple the length time at 7.5 minutes and does not make me giggle at all. That's the horribly bad track on this record. It's not Bugs. As bad as Bugs is and as funny as Bugs is, I'll give this a decent answer. Old and Brash 4451 says Mother off of Synchronicity by The Police. Yeah, this song blows ass right here. Experimental, I guess, but just straight up not what you want to hear from this band at all. Sonically, it's a lot like Bugs, to be honest. It sounds like a gag, but vocally it's just painful to listen to. Really weak track from this band, certainly the worst on the project. I think this is a great answer. Twist22 says Quiet off of Siamese Dream by the Smashing Pumpkins. Feels weird for the album sequencing, and not really a song I'd ever play on its own in my opinion. I disagree with my entire soul here, actually. This is a great track. Almost objectively, I'd say. Certainly not a song that detracts from the album in any way. I would argue the complete opposite. I think Siamese Dream as an album is another record I find to be the sum of its parts rather than a couple hits and their friends. I think the song is fantastic, to be honest. I don't really see this take. I don't think this is the worst song here. I'm not even sure if it's bottom 5 on the record. I think this is just a good song. Bean Cheesy says Cesaro Some Ability off of Enema by Tool. I know it's not technically a song, but putting Baby Crying in between the two debatably best songs on the album is truly despicable. This is a track that harshly, and I mean harshly, takes away from the record. It's actually a terrible listen every single time, and I think it has zero charm. The concept of the song narratively is fairly interesting, but in practice, this is an actual must-skip song. Its only saving grace is its length. It's only about 90 seconds long, but I can't actually put into words how long that 90 seconds feels. It's 90 seconds of a baby crying. Why the fuck would I want to listen to that? This is a great answer. Adam IU3XI says hats off to Roy Harper off of Led Zeppelin 3 by Led Zeppelin. More experimental garbage, I'm afraid. Bit off more than they could chew on an already pretty inconsistent project, but this is probably the weakest link here. Pretty terrible way to close a record. Really kind of annoying to listen to. The production here just kind of stinks. Very little charm here. A pretty unfortunate release, to be honest. I think this is a great answer. Bart Mort says Six Shooter off of Songs for the Deaf by Queens of the Stone Age. I don't understand this take, I fear. Is it the worst track here? Sure, I guess, but it's not a song I'd describe as bad, I don't think. Really high energy track. It's only a minute long. It's a great way to segue these two tracks. I can't agree at all, I don't think. If this were a full-length song, perhaps, but at only a minute, I can't say I don't like this. This is a bad answer. Gummeter1 says Graphic Nature off of Koi no Yokan by Deftones. Again, probably the worst song on this album, but by no means a bad track. I don't understand this, to be honest. It sounds a lot like the rest of the album, kind of a similar case to that of Dark Side of the Moon. Individually, I wouldn't call it a stellar track, but it's got its place on this album, and I think it gets the job done. I think this is another bad answer. Oddcon Based 113 says Moonchild off of In the Court of the Crimson King by King Crimson. This is definitely a massive step down from the rest of this project, for sure. But in this case, I think it only speaks to the quality of the rest of the album. I don't think this is a bad song, as much as people like to pretend it is. It's a little long, I'll admit that, but I don't think the idea or the production, or sonically, this is bad at all. It's a small blip on the record, but incomparable to actually bad music like we've touched on already. How could I plausibly put this next to a baby crying for 90 seconds? I think this is a bad answer. Marine Bullrat says Endless Nameless off of Nevermind by Nirvana. This is pretty fair. It's a track that's not even officially on the record. You won't find this track on a vinyl release, and I think that's for a reason. This track sounds super unpolished and kind of just unfinished to me. Vocally, it's unique, I suppose, but it's just a giant step in the wrong direction for this artist. Instrumentally and production-wise, I think this song has some chops at points, but it's certainly not a song I'm leaping out of my seat to throw on, and it definitely drags on for just too long. I think this is a good answer. 7VABC777 says Kim off of the Marshall Mathers LP by Eminem. Ruins the album experience for me. I skip it every time. This ruins the album experience, but Ken Kniff doesn't? Take the skits out. I still don't think this is the worst track here. Super dark listen, but I don't think that equates to bad. Several songs in here I think are just far less interesting and just flat out worse than that song. I think this is another bad answer. Riley Mina says Yeah off of Damn by Kendrick Lamar. Boring as hell, which is crazy coming from such an exciting album. I think this song is pretty good, to be honest. Certainly not your typical Kendrick track, and I won't say I'm looking for this R&B style from him, but I respect the attempt here, and I think it worked out better than you're admitting. I like the production here, I like the flow here. I don't mind this at all, to be honest. Definitely not a highlight and perhaps is a low line, but I don't think this is a bad song by any means. I think this is another bad answer. Rockblock 9640 says Big Man with a Gun off of the Downward Spiral by 9 Inch Nails. How can you post a video on this topic without mentioning this one? I don't mind this answer, actually. The Downward Spiral, one of my favorite albums of all time, but I do think this song kind of just takes up some unneeded space. Narratively, it doesn't really fit with the rest of the record. Sonically, it's not great. Lyrically, it's by far the emptiest track on the record. Even Trent Reznor has spoken about his qualms with the track. Its saving grace is its length, I would say, but it certainly doesn't have to be on this record. And it's at least a fair answer. I'll say this is a good answer. Z-Milch says Teenagers off of the Black Parade by My Chemical Romance. A fair answer, and certainly one I anticipated getting, but there's actually a worse track on this record, and it's Blood. It's a bonus track, but it's on every release, I think, and it certainly sucks. Really lackluster way to close out a record, and as much as I don't enjoy Teenagers, I can't say it's a worse song. Teenagers is a really unnecessary track on the project, but it's a commercial hit. Kind of the creep of the band. Definitely not a song I love, but I don't think it's a bad one either. I think this is another bad answer. Real John Nickelback says Die the Flu off of Around the Fur by Deftones. Classic and unfathomably common John Nickelback L, I'm afraid. This is not the worst song on the record. I'm afraid that comfortably goes to Ricketts, but I wouldn't even give that answer a lot of praise. I'm not going to call Around the Fur flawless, top to bottom, but I don't think there's a song here I would describe as flat out bad, no way. I like the song a lot. I don't even understand this answer. This is just a good song. Apostate's Music says Ars Moriendi off of California by Mr. Bungle. I'm not going to lie, I can't stand this track. Kind of just annoying, and I think the album would be 10 out of 10 without it here. Sounds like it's trying to be Disco Volante level crazy when it's really just not needed on this album. I don't really understand this take. It implies California is some completely out of place album for Mr. Bungle and that a track that could easily fit on the previous record doesn't make sense here. It's Disco Volante level crazy, and that's perfectly okay. I think it has its place on the album, and it's not the best song here. It certainly isn't the worst, and even more, certainly isn't a bad song. In fact, it's a good one. Exactly what I want from Mr. Bungle, typically. I think this is just straight up a good song. That's all I have written here. Thank you very much for watching. I feel like I was a little meaner today. If I was, please accept this bouquet of flowers as an apology. Subscribe and like if you enjoyed, please, and I hope to see you in the next one. Peace.